Good evening, morning, or whenever you're going to see this. Hello. Hope everybody's well out there. Greetings, salutations. Hello. I figured I'd just do a quick live tonight, and eventually, if anybody wants to watch it down the road, they certainly can. I hope everybody is well. I guess the East Coast is going to get a snowstorm, so I hope everybody is okay back there. That's it. Have a good night. No, I'm just kidding. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the tariff decision by the Supreme Court, since I talked about this before. Um, and beyond that, we will discuss also Gtii and its current status. That's exciting stuff. Woohoo! So before I begin, of course, I wanted to reference a couple of things that are very important, of course, and very related to nothing, as it turns out. What type of bird flies over a football stadium? A field goal. Get it? When ghosts play soccer, and there's a lot of ghosts that do play soccer, what is their favorite position? Of course, goalkeeper. And of course, in basketball, they often get called for goaltending. Okay. I don't know if you heard about this, but I just read about it before we started the live stream that there's a bunch of sperm that are starting their own football league, and they will be playing, obviously, at the condom. And last but not least, why should you swim in a ool as opposed to a public pool? Because there's no pee in it. So, moving on, all that aside, first of all, we're going to talk about the tariff decision. So all of you, well, I don't know if all of you, but there was a tariff decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court Friday. That could have been yesterday, I guess. Seems like a long time ago. And they ruled. I hate the way the way people characterize it. They say that the tariffs were illegal. I don't think the tariffs were not illegal. They were unlawful. What's the difference between illegal and unlawful? Illegal to me suggests criminal liability. Unlawful just means it's not permitted per law. That's all. That doesn't talk about any kind of criminal issue. But the Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision ruled that the emergency tariffs imposed by the executive branch were unconstitutional. Now, I had done more than a couple videos about this issue, probably about 6 months to a year ago. And I wanted to reiterate the story that I don't hear much discussed, but kind of is the crux of this matter. There was a gentleman named Leonard Leo, who is a conservative donor with a lot of power, I guess, in the conservative politics. And he, for the benefit of Trump in the first term and thereafter, recreated the Supreme Court. So he's the one, or at least he's credited with being, and I think he's affiliated with the Heritage Foundation or the Federalist Association or Society. I guess it's a society, not an association. But he's got a lot of power, obviously. And so he helped. I mean, he's attributed that he's the one who got the court to have such a conservative bend. At least 5 conservative justices, maybe 6. And he's responsible for getting, or at least he's credited with being responsible for getting Gorsuch, Barrett, and Kavanaugh on the court. Now, what's interesting about that was 2 of those 3 justices who are conservative justices voted against the executive branch on the tariff decision. And what's interesting about this is, so Leonard Leo is responsible or gets credited for stacking the court, let's say. In early 25, after the tariffs were announced, one of his organizations funded a lawsuit on behalf of some small business, importing business in Florida. I think it was in Florida, that imported from China, and they were being tariffed about that in China. So it's kind of interesting. Although he had helped Trump stack the court, here he was now in opposition to Trump as to the tariff issue. And I believe that that case was part of one of the cases that kind of ended up going in part to the Supreme Court. And when I heard Trump, 'cause Trump was pissed that the Supreme Court ruled as such, even though I think it's the appropriate ruling under the law that was at issue. He also referenced, I heard, where he blamed, without naming anybody, he blamed somebody whose interests he thought were more for the benefit of China. He didn't name the name, but I think he was referring to Leonard Leo, the very guy that had stacked the court and had the 2 out of the 3 justices kind of turn the tables on the administration, even though they're conservative justices. I believe the decision is correct, by the way. It's interesting that the court did not rule on the reimbursement, how that's going to be done. So now there'll probably be a bunch of lawsuits now for various people trying to get back the tariffs they paid. That'll probably have to go through trial, and then that'll probably go up on appeal, may go back to the Supreme Court on decision as to the reimbursement issue. When it happens, we don't know. I guess at least a year from now, probably after the midterms. So, but I think that's kind of interesting. So I think the decision by the Supreme Court that this particular method for applying tariffs was improper, I thought that was the correct decision all along. And if you go back and look at my videos, that's what I said. But there are other methods to impose it. It requires making certain findings, and it may be limited in time. And in fact, I think yesterday Trump imposed a 10% or 15% tariff on all these countries, which I think he can do, perhaps, but it's limited to 5 months. And now, since he did it because the other tariffs were thrown out, I think people will challenge it and say they were not legitimate. They were just substitution for what the policy was. And the policy is not supported by the tariff laws themselves. It's just a policy decision. So I will keep you apprised, but I thought it was kind of interesting because I don't hear much about Leonard Leo, and he's the guy who got the court appointed, 3 justices. Those 3 justices, 2 to the 3, kind of made the decision on this very important case. And, I like independence in the court, so whatever way it goes, I like when sometimes justices act outside their expectations. So to me, that was good. So that's the tariff issue. And I assume the administration is going to try other methods. We'll see how that goes. But I think they're going to all be challenged because, again, I think because they made a policy decision, now everything's going to be rationalized that they're doing this not because a tariff is needed, but because that's the policy. Hope that makes sense. All right. Let's move on to GTII. February 19th, there was a hearing. I attended. There were several counsel that attended also. It was a hearing on the settlement with Griffin, which was approved by the court. If you recall the settlement, Griffin gave back most of her shares. She kept a couple million of her shares, but gave back like 11 million shares, and is helping the receiver. At least that's justification for letting her off. And I think, it's very possible. And so that was approved. There was a motion filed that hasn't been heard yet or approved, giving Luke Rabari about 2 million shares. So he's giving back about 80% of his shares. Apparently, there's other potential settlements that were reached that we will learn about soon. Who could those be with? Could it be with David Reichman? Could it be with Justine Reichman? Very possible. We shall see. But I expect that to be done. It sounds like, in terms of bring. I think if you recall, there was a request to have about 40 million shares that weren't. There was no opposition to those question shares, and the receiver asked that the court then rule and order them returned. And I think that has happened also. So that's like 41 million shares. There's Kathy Griffin's shares, which I think is about 11 million. There is Luke Rabari's shares, which are several million. So there is a large number of shares that have been returned, to be quite honest. My question, of course, is not about the share returns, about the compensation. It's about the order of being able to liquidate, and I'll discuss that in a second. But I expect we'll hear soon. We will hear other things. That there was also a status conference set on that date, which was February 19th. And every month for the next 3 months, there'll be a status conference. The next hearing is on March 18th. That is the motion for compensation, but there will also be a status conference on that day also. There was no discussion about the audit, not complete, no real clarity provided about it. I think at the next hearing, so I filed a brief. I'll address it in a second. For the hearing on the 18th, I think I'll file another brief again addressing the audit issue and requesting that we get some kind of clarity from the auditors too. Why do we need clarity from the auditors? Just think about the history of the auditing of GTII. We had Borgers that got kicked out by the SEC. We had the next group who the receiver says were not working with the receiver and were not kind of doing what they were supposed to be doing. Then we have a new group that's brought in by the receiver. Then we have like a maternity leave, and we have to redo everything. I think maybe it would be nice to hear from somebody as opposed to the receiver, to hear from the horse's mouth what's going on. I have no reason to doubt that the audit is going to be completed soon, but I have every reason to doubt that the audit's going to be completed soon, because we've gotten what I would say is several deadlines that weren't deadlines, several suggestions that there was going to be completion but didn't happen. So why there shouldn't be some communication from the current auditor as to what the holdup is, because there always seems to be an issue. And at some point in time, and again, I expect the audit will be done very soon, but if it's not, at some point in time, the receiver needs to cut bait and find somebody else to complete it if these guys aren't. I was troubled by the fact, by the way, this is the most current auditor. At least the way it was portrayed is they engage an auditor. It must have been I presume it was a female auditor, and somebody didn't do their research or didn't disclose something, because that female auditor had to go on maternity leave. And because she went on maternity leave, the people that took over for her had to basically start all over. That doesn't sound right either, and especially after the history of the various auditors. So I think, and there's a group of plaintiffs who have counsel, and they can certainly contact their own counsel and make the suggestions. But I really think that we should get if the audit continues to drag on, and it's dragged on, there's no reason why we shouldn't hear from the auditors and get some kind of reassurance that this thing's going to be done ASAP, especially now that it appears that the hunt for the new shares were maybe at the tail end of bringing back new shares. So that's the audit. There's another status conference coming up on March 18th, which I mentioned, and the motion for compensation of the receiver is that day also. And the motion for compensation, just to remind people, it is something on the order of that the receiver brought back 50 million shares or something like that during that period, and once that's 5 million shares. I object to the reasonableness of the compensation and the fact that there's no restrictions. the plaintiffs, the counsel for other plaintiffs makes a different type of argument, a partial opposition, maybe to condition payment on various things. So there's two basic oppositions that are in play. Because it's a status conference and because I just referenced the audit, I may file an additional brief prior to the March 18th timeframe to address the audit again, just to kind of put it in front of the court one more time. I believe there's a deposition of an attorney Brook. I think it's BRUK, that's set for March 3rd, which is about 10 days away. And I've heard, although I haven't received, or at least haven't received confirmation, that the deposition of Alpine, or representative Alpine, and of the DTCC are going to occur also. And obviously this is a part about the investigation into the short shares and what's going on. And I will be attending all of those depositions and will report back. Again, I think the next one would be the attorney Brook, and then after that, Alpine and short issues and DTCC, interesting stuff that will be coming on. So just to kind of recap this brief update, we talked about the tariff ruling and Leonard Leo, who I think is basically responsible for the tariffs being overturned. And he was one who helped appoint the Supreme Court as is, and is a very powerful individual. So we talked about that, and we talked about GTII, a couple of settlements, Griffin approved, Ribaris is subject now. There'll be some additional ones. We may be near the end of the approval process. Audit still not done. Status conference next month on the 18th. Motion for compensation on the same date. Filed a opposition. Other counsels filed an opposition. There's a bunch of depositions coming up. And that is the sum and substance for you tonight. Hope you guys all have a great evening. Thank you for hanging out. Be well, take care of yourself, have a good evening, and see you soon. And I'll keep you updated as I learn other stuff. Good night.